So welcome everyone. I am Denver Gingerich, and this is The Future of Fixing Technology. And today I'm going to be introducing box theory, which I've been thinking about for a little while. So first, a little intro. I am the Director of Compliance at Software Freedom Conservancy, which means I direct our efforts to get companies to comply with software right to repair licenses, such as the GPL and LGPL. And as I do that, it causes me to think a lot about how we can get to where we want to be with respect to software freedom and everything that brought us to be interested in software freedom. I'm also the founder of JMP, which is a service that gives you freedom for your phone number. And it is entirely free and open source software. So we believe very strongly in software right to repair at JMP and believe everyone should have those rights. And it makes good business sense for us as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of personal technological autonomy, because when I think about software freedom and I think about why we are doing the things we're doing to try to promote and advance it, I think it all comes down to personal technological autonomy in the end. So we'll go through some examples here so you can see what I'm talking about. So for a long time, personal technological autonomy was inherent. So people didn't have especially complex technology. They had clothes, basic tools, and other things like that. And so it was relatively easy for people to repair their personal technology. And if they couldn't do it themselves, there was usually someone nearby who could, maybe a blacksmith to make you some new horseshoes or repair the ones that you had, or someone else like that to help you out. So this was the case for quite some time. And then eventually there were a number of developments. I think one of the bigger ones being the Industrial Revolution, and the means of production shifted dramatically toward a few organizations or people. So personal technological autonomy changed a lot as well, and what that meant for people. So one example of what some of this industrialization brought us were things like light bulbs, which were relatively inexpensive, but people couldn't really repair them at all. And another thing that came along in the 1910s was personal transportation technology. And by that, I mean automobiles. And so the 1910s is when things really took off with things like the Model T made by Ford. And this was a very repairable vehicle made by engineers who really put engineering first. And so the vehicle was naturally repairable as a result. So this was pretty good. Also, the Model T ended up being available for, and this is inflation adjusted, available for $5,000. So that's less than a quarter of the price of the cheapest new vehicle you can buy today. So this is pretty amazing and also very repairable. So this was wonderful that we had this technology and it was repairable by people. So in the 1920s, some developments came along, one of them in light bulbs. So there were a bunch of light bulb manufacturers that got together into a group called the Phoebus Cartel, and they decided that 2,500 hours was far too long for a light bulb to last. They decided that 1,000 hours would be much better, and so all light bulbs that they made, and since they were the biggest producers, that meant basically all light bulbs would now have a lifespan of 1,000 hours. So that was great for them because people had to buy light bulbs twice as often, but it was not good for basically everyone else. Another thing happened for planned obsolescence in the 1920s, and that was related to the automobile. So Henry Ford was very much this engineer who wanted engineering solutions to things, but Alfred P. Sloan, who was the head of General Motors, was a little bit more innovative in some ways. Sloan developed what we now call the model year for cars because he found that they were not selling enough cars. And admittedly, cars were reaching somewhat of a saturation point because everyone who wanted a car had one, more or less. And so they needed to figure out a way to make their sales continue to climb in the face of this. And so Sloan decided that we would have new cars every year, even if there was nothing really new about them, except for minor design changes. And this would incentivize people to buy new cars. It also made them less repairable because they would change every year. So you had to get a specific kind of part to make certain repairs. And so this was one of the things that we saw in the 1920s. And importantly, these were artificial limitations that were determined by hardware design. So fast forward a little bit to the 1960s, and we have a little bit of software freedom. That is a lot of software freedom, but just for some people. So people who worked at universities or in large companies that had computers, and these people would develop things on punch cards or on tape media, and then they would share those changes with other people. So they would mail those changes around, and everyone would get a copy who wanted it, even though it was a little bit slow to do that. But people got software freedom as a result. So that was pretty nice for a few. And then in 1970s, there were many people who could get software freedom because people could get computers in their houses. And so people would go to local meetups and they would share software. They would share tapes and other things that had software on them. And this was great because they could all learn from each other and share things. So this was a wonderful time for personal computing. Now, in 1976, a certain someone who worked at Microsoft wrote a letter. This was Bill Gates, entitled "An Open Letter to Hobbyists." And in this letter, Bill Gates said, in essence, I'm paraphrasing here. He said, I do not want you to share my software. You should pay for every copy that you make of the software that I am distributing. And so this was very different from what people were accustomed to doing because they were accustomed to sharing the software with other people and doing that freely. And so this was one of the things that led to software being seen as a very copyrightable good, and this artificial limitation of copyright enforcement, which was being applied to software. So fast forward a little bit more into the 2020s, and you have, for example, Sonos, who makes speakers. In 2019, they released an update for their speaker, which would fully brick the device. And the reason you would install this update is because you wanted 30% off their newest speaker. That is what they would give you for bricking your device. Now, this was something that led to a lot of devices going straight into the landfill that were fully functional devices, merely so they could push you to buy new devices. And this was possible because they tethered the device, and they could do this sort of thing to these devices. Now, there was also the Spotify's car thing. So this is hardware they made for some time, and then discontinued in December of 2024. So all of the car things became useless things at that time. So this was also quite unfortunate, but again possible because this is tethered to Spotify in this case. Now, the Amazon Echo is another example of some of these concerns. So for quite some time, the Amazon Echo allowed you to do local voice recognition. So you could turn on the setting, and it would allow you to operate the Echo without sending all of your voice data to Amazon. So a lot of people would understandably want to use this feature and did have it enabled. In March of this year, Amazon decided that they didn't want to let you do that anymore, so they pushed an update to all the Echoes and they turned that off. So all of your voice data went directly to Amazon from then on. So again, because it is tethered to Amazon, they can do this, but that's not great. And in this situation, the artificial limitation is being caused by this tethering, this fact that the software can be changed by the manufacturer of the device. Now, these are also examples here, especially these last ones, of techno-feudalism. These companies are exercising control of these devices that they have ostensibly sold to you, and this is quite a problem. Now, the fact that we don't have the means of production is perhaps not a problem in and of itself. There are lots of benefits, economies of scale and things like that, that make the fact that we don't have the means of production available to us as easily as we once did when things were simpler with our clothing and basic tools. But if we don't have the means of production, it is essential that we have the means of repair. So I want to dive in a little bit to a couple of these points. So one of them is this ongoing erosion of software freedom. So software freedom is not keeping up with technology changes. So when software freedom started, our computers, our personal computers, were relatively straightforward. They all looked relatively the same. But today, our computers are shaped like phones and cars and other things like that. But we are not getting software freedom in these devices. Even with phones, there's at least the baseband firmware, which is not free. So for people who do want full software freedom, it is only available to a few people. People who are able to use certain laptops or other devices that grant you this freedom, and people who are C developers, because that is what the base software is written in, and it is difficult to do something with that unless you are a C programmer. And so this is quite a problem, and one that we are not solving fast enough. Also, I'm ignoring the fact that your hard disk probably has software in it, in the hard disk controller, but we usually ignore that. Also importantly, software freedom is necessary, but it is not sufficient to give us personal technological autonomy. So we have to think beyond software freedom to get to where we really want to be. So fortunately, we have some precedents that we can look at to see where we might be able to go from here. So these are, for example, cars, trucks, and tractors. Now, all of these things have been around for well over 100 years at this point, and they have a lot more history as a result, and a lot more precedent that we can look at. And in particular, what I like to see as I research this more is that all of these devices, it has been determined over these 100+ years, are repairable by the people who own or possess the devices. There are lots of situations where things have been through the courts and otherwise, where it's been determined that people can repair these devices themselves. There should be nothing stopping them from doing that. And if someone makes a device modification that is harmful in some way, they're liable for that. So that causes people to be careful with the modifications they make. But importantly, they can still make those modifications because the vast majority of them are very beneficial with very few downsides. So perhaps we can use some of these precedents to frame the discussion a little bit. And what I've been thinking about as I look at these precedents is I've been thinking about another way to look at the devices that we have. And I call this way of looking at things box theory. So you see at the bottom here we have some boxes. On the left, you see a box that the cover has been removed. You can guess later what that device is. But you see people are poking around at this device, having a good time seeing what's going on in there. I think these might be children's hands here, so getting an early start on seeing how electronics work, which I think is great. And then on the right, we have some more boxes. These are boxes in the shape of phones, and so people are opening up those phones, seeing how they work, and also great to see how those look. So box theory, and I'll just read this straight out, says that there should be no limitations on how you can modify, change, adapt, repair, or fix a device that is in your possession. So that is to say, within the four walls of the box, or whatever shape this box might be, you decide how it operates. And I think this is a critical part of ensuring our personal technological autonomy, and it has a lot of precedent. So I think this is something that we should be using going forward. I would like to consider a few things about this before we, get into maybe debugging box theory a little bit. And what I'd like to start with is this idea of possession. So I intentionally used the word that a device that you're in possession of, because companies are very good at saying things like, well, we're not selling you this. You're getting a license, or you're leasing it, or you're renting it, or whatever. And so the point here is that if it's something that is physically within your control, you are in possession of the device, and therefore you should have these rights. So I think that's pretty important to make that, draw that line in the sand. Now, I was talking about liability earlier with cars, and thankfully cars have solved this problem for us already. We know that with devices that are much more dangerous than the electronics that we have, that it actually works in practice to allow people to repair the devices that they have, because they know that if something goes wrong, they will be liable for that. And so they make the changes carefully and safely. And this has led to a lot of innovation in a lot of ways. You can see a plethora of examples of interesting ways people have modified their cars and otherwise. So we've solved this problem. That's great. Thank you, cars, for that. Box theory is a multi-pronged approach. There are many ways that we can use box theory to talk about things, ways in which we can apply it. So we can use it when we're thinking about legislation that we might want to make, when we're talking to manufacturers about the best way to design products, and if we're trying to educate people on what freedoms mean, why it might be that they're frustrated about the way that things work. One example that comes to mind is that I was talking recently with a relative about subscription seat heaters. So these are seat heaters that are installed in a car at the factory, and they are disabled in software. And if you want to use them, you can buy a subscription to turn on this hardware that is already sitting in your car, that you're paying extra money to lug around with you, even though you're not allowed to use them unless you pay for that. And so I was like, well, tell me, why does this bother you? And this person couldn't elaborate. And I think this is really the sort of thing that box theory is trying to solve, is, how do you explain what is so frustrating about these things? And I think it's this personal technological autonomy that we want. And this is a way of explaining why it is that we should have that. So there are a few things also that it gives us beyond this. Some ways that we can additionally use it. One way, for example, is, if you're talking to your employer, maybe, I don't know, you're thinking about starting like a software developers union or something like that, and you want some premises for what you will and won't work on. You could say, anything that flagrantly violates the principles of box theory, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to disable a device, send it to the landfill. That's just wrong to me. So these sorts of things, I think it gives us a framework for talking about the sorts of things for which the sorts of things we want to stand up for, and how we can explain that to people. So it gives us a lot of things that you would expect from this. It gives us a better way of reusing, recycling our goods, less landfill usage, and it gives us a great way to keep our communities tighter, because we can all help each other out by being able to repair our devices. And I think it's very crucial, because we don't have these means of production, that we be able to do this, because having personal technological autonomy becomes very equalizing in society, because we don't have these people controlling our technology, we have a lot more power ourselves as individuals. And I think it will lead to a much better society in terms of the equality of everyone to control their own lives, and hopefully lead to better interactions between everyone as a result, because everyone becomes more equal this way. So thank you very much. And I'd really, I'll entertain questions and everything, but I'm particularly interested in seeing what people think about it. If we can, debug anything that seems a little bit odd about this, if there are ways that you would like to see it changed or adapted to make it more useful for you to use in conversations. So yeah, thanks, and I'll take questions. Yes.
So I was thinking about your example with the car. As scary as it is, planes are not much newer than cars, but they went in a very different direction. You can repair your own car, but at least in the U.S., we have two classes of airplanes. We have FAA certified and experimental. You can repair and even build your own experimental craft if you want. But for certified aircraft, you have to be a certified mechanic using certified parts to work on a certified aircraft. How do you feel about that paradigm where you are not allowed to repair it, but you are not required to go to the manufacturer to repair it either? You can go to a third party that they have their regulations.
So I'll just repeat the question because I don't think we have a mic for the audience. Let me know if I'm just roughly correct here, but there are kind of two classes of aircraft. There are essentially ones that you can repair yourself, like experimental aircraft, and then there are others where you have to use certified tools with certified technicians for this certified plane. And the question was, roughly speaking, what do I think about that? Is that like some sort of model maybe that may be beneficial in some cases, I'm guessing. Yeah. Yeah, so I think, it sounds like in this case, we're already kind of there. The experimental aircraft sound like personal technological equipment to me. And then the certified aircraft sound like probably larger aircraft that are used to transport lots of people, and so are not really personal aircraft per se. So maybe that's how I would answer that question is it sounds like, things are already kind of divided the way I would kind of expect given this, but maybe you can... Oh, I'm not sure. I guess I was just kind of trying to figure out what these different types of aircraft might be. But yeah, that may be something to think about a bit more. Because there's certainly like, it's not necessarily a fine line between what's personal and not. I think the fine line I was trying to draw is the boundary of the box. And so anything within the box you can change. But yeah, certainly if something classifies as personal or not, in some cases can be a gray area. Yes, go ahead.
I think the name box theory is interesting because it brings up the idea of a black box. That's clear. So there's an opportunity to find white box, gray box, and maybe some colors.
Yeah, definitely. So the observation was that that box theory brings up some ideas about like black box, white box, gray box. I think another thing I was thinking of is transparent box. Like that's kind of what we like is something that we can that for which we have full transparency. We can see all parts of the box. And you also reminded me of another thing I wanted to point out is that box theory builds on software freedom. So software freedom is necessary for us to have the principles of box theory because you should be able to change all of the software within that box as well. It's a necessary condition for us to have box theory. Yes, go ahead.
Box theory seems like it applies to bicycles, but and I don't think you're thinking literally mathematics in a box, but and there's the things inside the box too, right? Like how far down are you going? Because at a certain point, sure it makes sense you can repair a computer, right? But then video card board, right? That's what is the boundaries do you think that make sense for box theory. It's a little bit along the lines of like commercial versus personal, but like what's the scope that you think is makes sense and if you thought more about some boundaries on that you could.
Sure. So the question was about how far does box theory go, like in terms of the components inside of the boxes, like kind of how far should we is that roughly?
Yeah. Well, like,
Okay. Oh, what counts as a box? Yeah, I mean, part of what I was thinking of when I was thinking about this in general is like, well, a lot of things we get, like they come in a box. Like, so I was thinking, the boundary can be the cardboard box or whatever that you get in the mail. But of course, that doesn't apply to things like cars. Not a lot of them are delivered in cardboard boxes. So I wanted to make sure that we were, it's setting these four walls appropriately. So yeah, but I agree. That's another area where we could talk a little bit about what qualifies as a box. Yes, go ahead. No, sorry, in the front here.
In terms of obstacles to hardware freedom, there are some obstacles that are legal or regulatory, as in like it is a felony to bypass a technological access restriction to access copyright, whatever, And then there are some that are like market forces or just the way that companies build things. Like, well, technically you can replace the battery on your cell phone, but you need to purchase a several $100 device to like take the screen off of the chassis because it's been glued in place. What do you think, like, where's the balance? Which one of those do you think is like more important to tackle, sort of, or how do you see those two factors?
Yeah, those are great questions. So the question was about some things that are, I mean, the way I would say it is there are some things that are already violating box theory. Some examples being that these laws that protect DRM in different ways, and then also apologies, I'm blanking on the second example that you had. Oh,
Hardware companies make hardware that is just physically really, really hard.
Right. So, for example, like if your battery's glued in or something like that, it's very difficult for things to be repaired. So often the design itself of the hardware makes it difficult to have these rights. So I think I was thinking about DRM actually when I was doing this, and I was, part of that is to say, this would be another reason that I think having those sorts of legal protections for DRM is not a good idea, because it necessarily impacts the freedoms we have, the autonomy we have with devices that are personally like in our possession, and I don't think that's right. And I think it's been shown with cars and other things that it's much better. There's a lot more innovation if you can modify everything that is within this box. And of course, if something goes wrong, you are liable for that still. Like if you commit copyright infringement or something, you're still liable for that. It doesn't get you off the hook, but you shouldn't be restricted from using the device the way that you want to. So yeah, and then on the in terms of making devices difficult to repair, that's an area where I think a lot more discussion and research may be necessary, because I think some of this is like it was the easiest way to build it and the cheapest way, and so we're just going to do it. And a part of me is like, well, we do want things to be as low cost as possible for people to make it more accessible to them. I think there are a lot of other ways to solve things being out of reach in a price way for people. But yeah, gluing batteries is one of these things where it just feels very wrong to me. And so, box theory is a way of kind of helping us see where things are rubbing us the wrong way, but maybe, need some more work to fully define how we can solve those sorts of problems. Yes, in the middle.
Kind of follows up on this, because it feels like two sort of directions of this are two flavors of this, of like, there is the category of things where companies are putting extra time and effort and development into making this hostile. So like the heated seats thing of like, how do we create something that makes it hard for people to access so that we can make And then there's the like absence of access, which is like are they building a wall or are they just not building a bridge type of dichotomy? And so like the other side of it would be like, oh, well, we're not going to make this battery replaceable because it would be like so much harder and so much more complex or whatever. And it feels like it would be easier to like from a regulatory perspective to say, stop doing innovation, scare quotes for anyone who's in front of me, in the direction of like making things more hostile. That seems easier to say like, don't do that, but it seems harder to regulate or enforce, like, you have to make it this easy. It feels like there's a plausible design.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll try to repeat the question as best I can. So there's kind of two ways that things can be made difficult. One of them is by companies innovating, in scare quotes, was I think how the questioner put it, to add walls that didn't exist before. And another way to make it easier for people to have this autonomy is to do extra work to make it easier for people to have that autonomy. And like the glued batteries might be an example of that there. And so I think, yeah, that is an interesting area that we should think about some more. I think in my initial drafting, I'll just go back to it for a moment here. We say there should be no limitations on how you can do this. And so, you can maybe go a few different ways with that. You could say that you should not add any limitations. I mean, the wording here is a bit stronger than that. It says there should be no limitations. So it may imply some extra work that you want to do to make sure that there is nothing standing in someone's way from doing this. But yeah, I think that's definitely something to work out, because I think certainly I was thinking about those situations where you innovate by adding walls. We should not be adding those walls. But yeah, it's a little trickier when you have to do more work to achieve repairability. Yeah, but of course I would like that if it were feasible. Yes, in the front.
My main frustration with my phone at this point is how quickly it becomes obsolete because the software stops updating for it. How would you suggest to address that?
Yeah, so the comment was that that a phone can become obsolete because the software stops updating on it, and I think this is a situation where a lot of the freedoms that we have, the software freedom that we have, and on a lot of phones, every Android phone has Linux in it, so you have the right to get the source code for that, including the scripts used to control compilation and installation of the executable. So that means you can update the Linux on your phone, and you can replace the proprietary bits on top of that if you want. So I think that is something that we should definitely be able to do. It's covered by box theory because software freedom is a part of that. But yeah, it's something that we still need to work toward, because it is true that a lot of Android devices don't give you this because they are violating the GPL. So that is unfortunate, and we do need to fix that. In the back.
Hi, I was curious how you think the prohibition on limitations on physical things like, the gluing of the battery, or how Apple has its own type of screws that you can't use like normal screw head. Do you have any thoughts on how that could be defined? Because I think that with software freedom, if someone provides, like a shell script, it's like, okay, you can run that anywhere. But how do you say, well, as a company, you're not allowed to have your own type of screws or something?
So the question was, how do you say, and this is just an example, how do you say to a company you're not allowed to have your own type of screws or other things that make it difficult for people to repair things? And so this is another area that definitely, we need to think more about and do some more research on, because I am a bit hesitant to legislate the Phillips screwdriver, because there are some, it's can slip and whatever, there could be a better one that we would want to standardize on. So yeah, that's another tricky thing. But I think a thing that is good to think about, along with like gluing the batteries and stuff, I would put those kind of in a similar category. Yes, over there. Mm-hmm.
So, what do you do about defining personal versus like commercial or corporate or similar when sometimes it's the same technology being used in different contexts? So, for example, it's a bad thing if my phone is locked down and I can't get root on it. It's a good thing if a corporate device that has access to consumer data is locked down so that it can't exfiltrate consumer data. It's a bad thing if I have unbreakable hardware-assisted DRM. It's a good thing if we have the nascent ability to run a VM in the cloud that we trust and the cloud vendor doesn't. These are the same technologies. How do we define this in a way that the pro-consumer things actually work and the anti-consumer things don't?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'm going to focus on the second example of yours because I think that's the trickier one, probably. And so that is basically asking the question, we have DRM on consumer devices, which is maybe something that we don't want to have. But if we have a similar type of DRM on cloud servers, it can guarantee for us that, in some ways, to some extent, can guarantee that we are running the software that we think we are on this server that is not physically located near us. I think those are that is a tricky question. I mean, I think in this situation, like I'm always a bit wary of things running on devices that I don't have like physically near me, that I cannot verify are running in the way that I want to. So I would be hesitant to trust that sort of a setup myself, just in general, because I think it's very difficult to do that right. But yeah, I mean, it is something worth considering a bit more. Like if we do want to enable or try to make that sort of a DRM work. But yeah, I'm just a bit nervous about it, basically. In the back over there.
I was kind of curious, do you consider a malicious compliance for this if a vendor were to do something like say, we're going to sign this computer that is in this context, but you can still go do whatever you want, but if it doesn't go with the signature, it's just not going to work at all.
Okay, so the question was, would I consider it malicious compliance if the device had some keys on it, and if you modified the software or presumably other parts of it, then it would just not work anymore. And I guess, in general, that does sound like malicious compliance. I mean, one of the things I think about when it comes to hardware aspects is that a lot of, say, John Deere tractors, John Deere implements something called parts pairing, where if you replace a part on the tractor, it will not operate until a John Deere technician comes with a computer, plugs it in, and says, this part with this serial number is allowed to be paired with this tractor with this serial number. And after that, it will start working. So that, to me, that's a clear example of, or would be a clear example of malicious compliance. And so it's these sorts of things where I would be hesitant to say that that's not malicious compliance, although maybe there are some situations under box theory where it could be acceptable as long as you can run the things that give you freedom in place of those other things. Yes, in the front row.
Just to take the John Deere example a little further, what about safety considerations? So you're saying a John Deere technician has to come in and give the code, but they've got a brand rep around the John Deere tractor. And if you put a part in there that is not compatible in some way, your tractor blows up while you're trying to plow your field with it, that could reflect on their brand. It's not their fault because you messed with the tractor and you did something that maybe you weren't supposed to do, but that's not how the optics are going to look initially.
So the question is, I'm going to summarize it as brand optics. So it sounds like the concern here is that if you put a non-John Deere part into a tractor and then something happens and then it blows up. Like, that's not great for John Deere's brand. And I guess how I would respond to that is with like kind of the history that we have in cars and tractors already. Like, I think there are a lot of people modding cars today in different ways. Like, I don't know if Ford or GM really like how a lot of their cars look now after people have been through modifying them. But I think they also know that they can't sue them or do anything about that, because that is a right that people have to modify their cars. And so I think while I do recognize that there may be brand concerns about this, I think they've been established, and I think we should continue to establish them in a way that people understand that things with certain brands on them can be modified, because that's a necessary thing that we have in a lot of fields. And I think we can't let the brand become more important than people's personal autonomy, because I think then the brands have too much power over us. And so I think we need to, if that is the narrative that people have in their head about how brands work, we need to change that narrative so that people understand that a brand does not mean that something is, forever and always only the thing that John Deere made it to be. In these, four walls of the tractor, that it could be something else after it gets delivered to the customer.
But what about safety concerns? I mean, I kind of pinned it to the tractor might
Mhm.
blow up. What about the concern around safety, that maybe the original manufacturer has an interest in making sure the thing is still safe to use?
So the question is about safety considerations, like the manufacturer may have an interest in making sure that it continues to be safe to use. I've thought about different ways for this. I've heard this sort of argument in a few different ways. I think if brands are really concerned about that, there are a bunch of options. Like, they could, make their brand less prominent or something else like that. If you press a button, maybe that makes the brand logo disappear. That seems fine to me, because if it's really just the brand they care about, then they should be fine with that happening, because that really is what I've seen in a lot of these discussions, is that's the concern. So yeah, I think there are a few ways to solve that.
Safety liability, I mean, that's how you decide it, right?
Yeah, and so the comment was safety liability, and I think that goes back to one of my points about how liability after modification is on the person who made the modification. So that's generally how it's been solved historically. Yes, go ahead.
So I think it was really good, and this kind of comes off a little bit of the issue on safety that I think of, is that just in my experience, working with the FCC and Wi-Fi firmware, that this is, I think, harder to argue for certain types of, like, I don't know how I would describe it, as like not modifiable software or special software, in the sense of like this is an easier thing to argue in like the infotainment system of your car. This is harder to argue in the case of the thing that measures like how much gasoline is going into the engine at any time. And that those are very clearly modifiable, and I would actually argue probably should be, but at the same time, like, they're almost forgotten, but also by regulatory people, it's really important, that part of it. So I think of like things like the emissions scandal from VW, and like I would argue, well, this is a sign that VW shouldn't be able to do this, but a regulator would be like, well, it's a sign we shouldn't let anybody modify this. This is really dangerous. So how do you think that box theory kind of fits into addressing that problem, or whether you think there's something else that we have to consider?
Sure. So I'm going to use the last example mainly there, and you can tell me if I'm missing something in that. So the general question is, what about some different aspects? Like, for example, if a regulator looks at Dieselgate, where VW modified the computer that controlled fuel emissions to operate in a certain way when it was being benchmarked and a different way when it was being operated in normal usage, so that it could produce more emissions, be more powerful, et cetera. That a regulator might look at that and say, well, VW is definitely not allowed to do that, so the customer should not be allowed to do that either. And so I think that is, a good example of where we need to think more about how to implement this, because there are a number of ways to solve that problem. I mean, that is incidentally something that John Deere brings up a lot when you say, I'd like to modify my tractor. And they said, well, we absolutely couldn't allow that, because then you could make your tractor have all these emissions, and we certainly couldn't let that happen. But I mean, people have been modifying their tractors for decades and decades, producing more emissions. And I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying if that is a concern we have, we need to solve that at the place where it's happening, not at some like higher level that gives John Deere or VW more control over the technology that you're getting. I mean, one thing that happened in the province where I live for quite a few years is that certain types of vehicles had to regularly go through emissions testing. So you would drive your vehicle to this testing site and you would get it tested to see how much emissions it made. So if this is a serious concern, you could have that sort of thing implemented to ensure that vehicles are complying with the emission standards. But yeah, I think I wouldn't use that as a reason to lock down the device. Yes.
So I think one of the things on these safety issues is that John Deere's concern really is safety. They can provide specifications for how this part needs to work in order to be safe. And I think that's a lot simpler answer to that type of concern from a vendor is, look, just like with a car seat, there's instructions about how to use a car seat safely. And you can have, if you want to replace this part, here's the specifications for how that needs to work.
Yeah, and so the comment was, if John Deere is concerned about safety, then they can provide additional information about how to make a replacement or make replacing a part safe, and similar to how, say, car seats have instructions for how to safely install the car seats. So I think we have another few questions. I will just note that while we are officially at time here, I'm happy to stay longer. People are, of course, welcome to go to Punch Bowl Social or otherwise, which is starting, I think, at the top of the hour. But yeah, I'm happy to stay here and answer questions. And I don't think I have to kick anyone out here. So I'll just keep answering questions from the assembled audience as long as I can. And then we can move it to the hallway. Yes, right there.
Comment on the DRM versus server conversation from earlier. It seems to me like there's a big difference in who's offering the service. Right? Like if a cloud provider installs DRM on their machine of their own volition in order to then offer me a service where it'll only run the software that I want, that seems different than like Netflix requiring me to install DRM on my machine so that I can use their service.
Yeah.
Which party is installing the DRM is different.
Yeah, that's a good point. On the earlier example about DRM for locking down personal computers or things that act like personal computers versus installing it on a cloud server, the DRM in the cloud server situation is being installed by the person who owns that in order to make the service more valuable for whoever is using it. And I think there was maybe a response to that.
So, first of all, I agree with you. I think that's an intuition that doesn't automatically universalize if you don't already share the values of the people in this room, because from Netflix's perspective, you installed a computer that has the capability for remote DRM because you want to play their videos. You could also choose to not play their videos. The business decided to install this confidential compute capability to get the business of people who want to run those VMs. Corporate wants you to find the difference between these two pictures.
So yeah, the comment there was about how Netflix may argue that you chose to install this DRM on your own computer in order to watch these videos, so that was your choice. So yeah, there are interesting ways this can be argued. Yes, on the
I
there.
just want to mention, there's talk on Saturday, DRM security or both. How do we decide that Matthew Garrett? So that's, I think.
Yeah. So there's a talk on Saturday called DRM Security or Both by Matthew Garrett. I think that would be a great place to discuss these sorts of things further. So I'll maybe take any questions that don't relate to those. Yes, in the back.
So with regards to the proposal that the limitations be not present around possession, I think I'm definitely sympathetic to the idea that, you know, we want to avoid in our philosophy these sorts of loopholes from a company that might want to pretend that you don't own a thing when you really do. But I am concerned about extending all the way to possession, because there are a lot of what I consider to be legitimate cases where you are in possession of a device, but you do not in any meaningful way own it. For example, taking a tablet out from the library as something you can take home from the library. I should not be able to reinstall the operating system on this tablet and then return it to the library with a different operating system on it. That would maybe be something the library should be allowed to fine me for example. Or if I rent a car from a car rental agency, different from perhaps leasing a car where I'm basically the owner, but I'm not really owning it. But if I'm renting a car for one day from a car rental agency, it might be not great if I return it with different wheels than it came with. They might not like that, and it might be okay if
They might have these nicer wheels.
well, but you know, I don't think it should necessarily be a philosophical problem for my rental contract to state, thou shalt not replace the wheels with totally different wheels before returning the car. Things like this, where I think possession is maybe too broad for
Yeah, so the comment was that the word possession, if used literally, may be too broad, and two examples given were a tablet that you take out from the library. It might not be good if it were returned with a different operating system, or a car, if you rent it from a rental car place, if you return it with different wheels, that may not be appropriate. I guess, you know, having not thought about this too much, I might say that sort of thing, I might not be opposed to that sort of thing being in a rental contract, whereas like an ownership contract, that would not be an enforceable provision. So that's a way that I would think about that. But yeah, I mean, you know, right now there certainly is nothing limiting you from changing the wheels on your rental car. Like they normally. Right. Yeah. There are probably things in the contract, but yes, nothing physically. In the back.
So how do you feel about the right to have other people work on your things? So in the U.S., like I'm allowed to work on the AC system of my car because it's my car and whatever. But because I don't have an EPA certification for working with refrigerants, if my buddy says, "Hey, can you do this on my car?" or I can't do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question is, what do I think about regulations for things like, for example, doing repairs on the air conditioning unit in your car? Because you are allowed to do that on a car you own yourself, but your buddy is not allowed to help you out unless they have EPA certification to do that. And I think this is very similar to how it works, I think, in a lot of states and provinces where you are allowed to make changes to the electrical system in your home by yourself. You're permitted to do that, but you're not permitted to do that on anyone else's house unless you're a certified electrician. And so yeah, I think, you know, we could handle that in a similar way. I mean, it is unfortunate if we have these sorts of things, but I think it relates a little bit to some of the emissions discussions we had earlier. Like there could be ways of having third parties test the modifications to ensure they're compliant. That does not require everyone doing them to be certified. So yeah, we could think about that a little bit more. Yes.
Yeah, I have two questions. Ted, quick. You alluded to this earlier. What is that being tinkered on?
Oh yeah, the item being tinkered on. Does anyone want to take a guess about what that is on the left?
Tape recorder?
Yeah, it looked like a tape
It's close.
VCR.
I guess I'll have to take that. But it's the other, the not a VC. Yeah, it's a Betamax player. Yeah. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, my second question was, so let's say, there are some things I want to modify and have full control of, and there are other things that I don't fully want that, whether like, with the John Deere example, if I'm a farmer and like my insurance is gonna be cheaper if everything goes through a certified John Deere thing, or, I can pay a little bit more insurance, and just have, an item that I full on own, and I can modify however I see fit, but, I have to pay a bit more insurance premium, and like, I can kind of balance these options. Do you think there's a way for kind of this box theory, one of this John Deere kind of model to coexist?
That's interesting. I guess I'm not sure what it sounds like you're proposing that John Deere could have two models, one where you pay a bit less for the vehicle, the tractor up front, and then you're tied to John Deere for the repairs, and then another one where you pay either more for the vehicle or some kind of insurance, like assuming that insurance is needed for if you make incorrect modifications or something to it. I don't know. That feels wrong to me, kind of at the surface, but I'd have to think more about it. I think maybe you have a response to that.
This is like carrier locked phones. You can pay less for a phone if you enter into a contract with the carrier where they lock down the bootloader and you have to use them as your.
So the comment is this is like carrier locked phones, and for me, I mean, if you can allow me like a 1 minute rant or something, this seems like. That it seems to me like carrier locked phones is really a problem to be solved by a third party financing department. That should have nothing to do with the phone itself or the carrier that is involved, and that everyone should be using some third party financer, and they could, establish some sort of escrow for the phone, or like just similar to a mortgage for a house, like. You could have that kind of setup. It just seems unconscionable that we have this locking to achieve basically the same thing, but with much worse side effects. Yes?
I am curious, so with the whole safety thing and stuff, I feel like there's always this spectrum of autonomy and safety, and just not to be too broadly philosophical. But I also know that there are right to repair laws happening here in Oregon and elsewhere, and is there a precedent with those or with other things in someone brought up car seats, is this a thing that we already handle well in some scenario? Because I feel like we're saying scenarios, but has anyone done this right?
Yeah, so the question is, has this been handled well already in some scenarios? And I think it is possible that it's been handled well in some scenarios. I mean, I like to think I'm fairly up to date on different right to repair legislation around the world, and I think none of it really solves all of these problems. I think a lot of it solves a good portion of these problems, but I think part of my goal with introducing box theory was for us to have a way of talking more about it, for us to be able to draw a line in the sand to say, this is what our goal should be right here. For some people, we've achieved software freedom. I would say that is an increasingly small number these days. So I think we need to be thinking bigger, talking about these other things. And I think this is kind of a benchmark to measure things like right to repair legislation against. How far does it get you toward that goal?
I have one little follow-up
Mm-hmm.
which is has there been a model that companies feel incentivized to do this? Because I only see the clear incentivization of them doing nefarious things to get more money, but has anyone profited off of creating repairable things? And maybe I'm just not thinking of it off the top of my head.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Has anyone profited off of making repairable things? Because the business incentive seems to always be in the other direction. I mean, that depends how you look at it a little bit. Like an example, and I'm not saying I've done extensive research on this, but an example might be framework, like the laptop maker, which I happen to be using, but I haven't done much research to know like if they're very good in all ways on these sorts of things. I know some of their desktop things are less repairable, which is unfortunate. But yeah, and in that case, I feel like they are like that is their model. Like the brand is repairability in the case of framework. So that's a little bit different. I think probably what you're talking about is more a situation where businesses are naturally incentivized, like not necessarily as a part of their brand specifically. And that's a good question. I don't know if there are ways like that. I think we could. I'd love to think about more ways that we could make that happen because, and that's partly why I wanted to talk more about box theories, because I think it's a great way of us seeing, well, does it meet the bar? How did we get there? Like, how can we incentivize that? Does it have to be through legislation? Could it be from other ways of encouraging like consumer behavior or something like that? Yeah, absolutely. I want to think more about that. Yes.
It seems worth exploring, and this is obviously a broad topic, but externalities are a pretty huge part of this. And a part of why this keeps coming up, whether it's safety, whether it's emissions, whether it's any number of other things, is externalities not being charged to who's responsible for them. If you as the owner of a car or a tractor are personally responsible for paying for the externalities of whatever pollution you produce, or paying for the insurance for whatever liability for whoever might be injured by a device, then it's up to you to say, okay, well, I bought a safe device and then I modify it and now my liability goes up. I bought a device with certain emissions, I modify it, it makes more emissions, I'm responsible for paying for the additional externality. We bundled a lot of that up into, well, that's handled by the car manufacturer or that's handled by regulations. And if it's more directly attached to the consumer, then you have more choice of, well, I've made it pollute more, so I need to pay for that externality, but that might be a cost I'm willing to pay.
Yeah, that's a good thought there, and this goes along with some of the liability questions, and it's talking more specifically, maybe more broadly. Like safety liability is one example of an externality, and so the idea here is to tie modifications more directly to externalities that those modifications may have. And one example was emissions. You know, if you choose to make something a modification that increases emissions, you should have to pay for that externality. And perhaps that is a way of solving some of these issues with externalities that modifications can have. So yeah, I agree with that. Yes.
As we've been talking about this, I think there might be a weakness here, and I don't know that necessarily. And I think it's still really valuable with model for looking at it. But I think of the thing, the car thing, whatever it was, from that Spotify, and they could reasonably give you something that complies with box theory, and still effectively brick the device by just saying you can't connect to our service anymore. And so like you still control it, you still have all the rights to use it, but it doesn't do anything of any use unless you want to like turn it into something else. But like the average consumer, they're like, well, who cares about box theory? I can't listen to any music.
Yeah, that's a good point. So the comment was about Spotify's car thing, which one way that they could disable it is to allow you to do other things with it, even if it can't listen to music, like even if it has lost that tether to the cloud service that was required in order for it to operate as designed. And I think in the case of car thing, based on my research, some people have been able to install modified software onto it, which is great. I'm glad they could do that. I don't know what they had to do that. I'm guessing it was far more complicated than I would want it to be for people to have that freedom in their devices. But yeah, that's something I would entertain as an idea. But I think one of the things too that I've been thinking about with box theory is that people should have the right to understand how it works. For example, like to understand which data is being sent or received on the device, because I think that's an important part of this. And I think we're not at a part we're not in a place in society or civilization where we can say where we could reasonably ensure that everything is free software to make this happen. I think we would need some sort of transition where we have regulations and, backed up by audits or things like that, so that people can have this comfort level with exactly what is going on, even if they can't get all of the source code right away. But I definitely want to get to that point. Yeah. Yes. Are we? Do the video people want us to wrap up? Yeah. Okay. All right. So I think I will take questions in the hallway now. So thank you very much, everyone. Appreciate you sticking around.